Before the first American combat troops landed in Vietnam, the war had already been built in quiet rooms, signed papers, and strategic calculations. It did not begin with one dramatic invasion. It began with money, advisors, weapons, fear, and a belief that one country had the right to shape another country's future. To understand what the United States did in Vietnam, well, we have to begin before the famous helicopters, before the jungle patrols, before the burning villages on television. We have to begin after World War II, when Vietnam was trying to escape colonial rule. For decades, France had controlled Vietnam as part of French Indochina. Vietnamese nationalists wanted independence. Many of them followed Ho Chi Minh, who led the Viet Minh against Japanese occupation, then against the return of French power. At first, the question was simple. Would Vietnam become independent, or would colonial rule return under a new name? But the Cold War changed everything. Washington looked at Vietnam and did not see only a country asking for independence. It saw communism spreading through Asia. It saw China, the Soviet Union, and the fear of losing influence. That fear became policy. So the United States began supporting France. It gave money, weapons, aircraft, and supplies. By the early 1950s, America was paying much of the French war effort in Indochina. This was not yet a direct American invasion, but it was a major step. It turned a colonial war into a Cold War battlefield. Vietnamese independence was now being judged through the lens of global ideology. Then came Dien Bien Phu in 1954. France was defeated. The old colonial system cracked. The Geneva Accords temporarily divided Vietnam at the 17th parallel. The North was controlled by Ho Chi Minh's government. The South was led by anti-communist forces. Nationwide elections were expected later, so Vietnam could be reunified. But here is where the story becomes darker. The United States did not want those elections to happen under conditions where Ho Chi Minh might win. American leaders feared that a unified Vietnam would become communist, so Washington backed a separate South Vietnamese state, supported Ngo Dinh Diem, an anti-communist leader who became president of South Vietnam. This was not just diplomatic support. The United States helped build the South Vietnamese army. It sent advisors. It trained security forces. It provided economic aid. It strengthened a government that many Vietnamese saw as artificial, corrupt, and dependent on foreign power. The official language was defense. The practical result was interference in Vietnam's political future, and then the pressure increased. In the late 1950s and early 1960s, resistance grew in South Vietnam. The National Liberation Front, often called the Viet Cong by the United States and South Vietnamese government, against Diem's regime. Washington described this as communist aggression directed from the North. But the reality was more complex. There was Northern support, yes, but there was also deep anger inside the South caused by repression, inequality, forced relocation, and political exclusion. Instead of asking why the South Vietnamese government was losing legitimacy, the United States doubled down. More advisors arrived. More weapons arrived. More military planning arrived. Under President John F. Kennedy, the number of American advisors grew sharply. The war was still officially South Vietnam's war, but the machinery behind it was increasingly American. Then came the coup against Diem in 1963. South Vietnamese generals overthrew and killed him after losing American confidence. Washington did not directly execute the coup, but it knew about it and signaled that it would not stop it. This was another turning point. The United States was no longer simply backing a government. It was helping decide which leaders were acceptable. But the real explosion came in 1964. The Gulf of Tonkin incident became the gateway to full-scale war. The United States claimed that North Vietnamese forces attacked American naval vessels. One attack did occur. The second reported attack was highly disputed and later shown to be uncertain. Yet, the Johnson administration used the incident to gain congressional approval for broad military action. The Gulf of Tonkin resolution gave the president enormous power to wage war without a formal declaration. This was the moment the Quiet War became an open war. In 1965, the United States launched Operation Rolling Thunder, a massive bombing campaign against North Vietnam. The idea was to pressure Hanoi, weaken its supply lines, and force it to stop supporting the insurgency in the south. But bombing did not break North Vietnam's will. Instead, it deepened the destruction and expanded the war. That same year, American combat troops arrived in large numbers. Marines landed at Da Nang. Soon, hundreds of thousands of U.S. soldiers were deployed across Vietnam. The United States said it was protecting South Vietnam from invasion. From the Vietnamese perspective, foreign troops had arrived on Vietnamese soil to decide Vietnam's political destiny by force. And then came the ground war. American strategy relied on search and destroy missions. Troops moved through villages, jungles, and rice fields looking for enemy fighters. Body counts became a measure of success. Commanders reported numbers killed. Washington used statistics to show progress. But the battlefield did not work like a scoreboard. Fighters disappeared into local communities. Villagers were caught between armies. Suspicion became deadly. Entire rural areas were treated as hostile zones. Villages were searched, burned, relocated, or bombed. Many civilians were killed by artillery, airstrikes, and ground operations. Some were killed in massacres, the most infamous being My Lai in 1968, where American soldiers murdered hundreds of civilians. That event shocked the world because it revealed what war had already done to moral judgment. The United States also used technology on a massive scale. Helicopters moved troops quickly. B-52 bombers dropped enormous loads of explosives. Napalm burned through forests and villages. Agent Orange and other herbicides were sprayed to destroy jungle cover and crops. The chemicals caused long-term damage to people, land, and future generations. The war did not end when the shooting stopped. It remained in bodies, soil, and memory. But the invasion was not only military, it was also political and psychological. The United States supported pacification programs meant to control rural populations. It backed intelligence operations targeting suspected communist infrastructure. One of the most controversial was the Phoenix program, which aimed to identify and neutralize Viet Cong networks. Supporters called it counterinsurgency. Critics called it assassination, torture, and terror. In practice, many innocent people were caught in the net. At the same time, Washington tried to control the story. Officials told the American public that victory was near. They spoke of progress, enemy weakness, and stability. Journalists on the ground reported a different reality. Soldiers saw a war with unclear goals. Vietnamese civilians saw destruction arriving from the sky. The Tet Offensive in 1968 exposed the gap between official claims and battlefield reality. Even though communist forces suffered heavy losses, the offensive proved that the war was far from under control. That was the peak of the tragedy. The most powerful military in the world could destroy almost any target. It could not create legitimacy for a government many people did not trust. It could kill fighters. It could not kill the desire for reunification and independence. It could win battles. It could not explain why Vietnamese villages had to be burned to save them. After years of bombing, fighting, and political pressure, the United States began withdrawing troops under President Nixon. But the war did not simply stop. Bombing expanded into Cambodia and Laos, spreading devastation beyond Vietnam's borders. Vietnamization shifted more combat responsibility to South Vietnamese forces, while American air power continued. The Paris Peace Accords were signed in 1973. U.S. combat forces left. In 1975, Saigon fell, and Vietnam was reunified under communist rule. So what did America do to invade Vietnam? It did not arrive in one single step. It financed a colonial war. It blocked a political settlement it feared might favor its enemies. It built and armed a separate South Vietnamese state. It sent advisors, then combat troops. It bombed the North. It fought across the South. It used chemical defoliants, forced relocation, intelligence campaigns, and overwhelming firepower. It framed the war as defense against communism. Many Vietnamese experienced it as foreign intervention against national self-determination. The historical record is clear on one point. The Vietnam War was not only a military conflict, it was a collision between Cold War strategy and a people's struggle over independence, identity, and reunification. The United States believed it was containing communism. Vietnam paid the price in destroyed villages, dead civilians, fractured families, and generations of trauma. And that is the haunting lesson. An invasion does not always begin with tanks crossing a border. Sometimes it begins when powerful men look at a smaller country and stop seeing human beings. They see maps, they see ideology, they see risk, they see strategy. Then they make decisions from thousands of miles away, and millions of ordinary people are forced to live inside those decisions.